Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am a recovered alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. This is week number 57 of the current cycle. Thank you for joining us. We are finishing up working with others. Specifically, we have a list of directions that we gave out, which were how to, kind of walk through once you have a prospect, what do you do with that person? The beginning of this chapter has a lot of information that's quite dated. Back in those days, you couldn't just go to a meeting. Today, you need to find someone to work with, go to a meeting. There are people dying, literally dying from this disease, languishing in the back of the meeting rooms that we go to, and we're letting it happen. We're not reaching those people. We're not letting them know that this is a matter of life and death, and it is a race. So if you hear people saying this is not a race, don't rush through it. Get as far away from those people as you can, because it is a race. That window of opportunity that which is going to slam shut at some point, and the obsession to use will return. We just don't know when. Could it be a week, a month, a year? More likely a matter of days. So in the window of opportunity, we approach it on the basis of 48 hours. We assume the prospect is going to relapse in 48 hours. So what do you do? Now, again, as I said, this chapter in the book has a lot of dated information in the beginning because it tells you to find people, go to a minister or a priest or a doctor. Today, I don't think you're going to get very far, not with lawsuits being what they are and confidentiality and so on. So I don't think you're going to get too much there. Um, you want to get to find an alcoholic or an addict at a hospital setting, get involved in a detox or a treatment center. That's how you can override that system. You can get right to the prospect while they're in treatment, get them started on the book, and hook up with them when they get out. So as I said, there's a lot of dated information here, but once you get past that, once you have the prospect in front of you, how do we get their attention? How do we get them to ask the $1 million question, which is, how did you do it? I see that you're the same as I am, yet you're sober and I'm not. How did that happen? And Bill tells us that we start by telling him our story. We tell him our active story. This is not the time for spirituality. It's not the time for recovery. It's a time to tell them the drinking stories, the drugalogs. Meetings aren't necessarily the place for that. This is the time and place for that. So we tell them what that was like. And then we assign a name to it. We say, see this picture I just painted of my life up to a certain point? That's a picture of an alcoholic. That's what I am. I am an alcoholic. And let me define what that means. And we explain it to him. We explain the allergy. We explain the obsession. We explain the spiritual malady, which sets this all in motion. If it wasn't for the spiritual malady, we wouldn't give in to the obsession. And if it wasn't for the giving into the obsession, we wouldn't trigger the allergy, which is the craving that sets in that tells us once we start, we cannot stop. So we tell people what that is, and then we start to explain the solution that we found. But we only do that when they have asked that magic question, which is, okay, how is that accomplished? How did you do that? How did you go from someone like me who can't put a day together to someone like yourself who has what, years, months, whatever it is? How did you do that? And then we tell them, we outline the program of action. And the directions that we've handed out pinpoint a lot of the things that we'd be focusing on. But I don't want to spend too much time on this chapter. I want to wrap this chapter up and move on. We are on page 102. We are coming to the end of chapter working with others. And we're about to move. We're going to skip few chapters and go right to employers, because to employers, I believe, has a lot of great 12-step information on it. It has a lot of information about what to do and how to deal with the newcomer, even if the newcomer in that setting is somebody at work versus somebody you run into at a meeting. So we're going to take a look at that chapter and you'll see why we're thinking that way. But I want to finish up this chapter. So we're on page 102. And those of you who have the list, the directions for working with others, which Andy will put up in a minute, we are on that list. We're on page 6 in that list on number 40, the 40th direction for working with others. And you'll find that information on page 102, paragraph 0. There we go. Be sure they're on solid ground. If you look at that top paragraph, the third line down starts that sentence. Be sure you are on solid ground before you start, and that your motive in going is thoroughly good. Let's back up a little bit. The information that we've been telling the newcomer is we can, as recovered alcoholics, there's nowhere that we are afraid of going. There's nothing that we can't do, providing two criteria are met. The first criteria is we are spiritually fit. We are on solid spiritual ground. The second is that we have the right motive in being there, that we're not going to catch a few vicarious thrills about being around people who are still drinking or drugging. There's a specific reason why we're going there. I had a fellow that I worked with for many years who retired, and he used to go out drinking every Friday night with a lot of people from the dealership, not me. But when he announced his retirement, he said he wanted all those people to come and he was going to buy them drinks for on him the whole evening. Now, I didn't want to be any part of a drinking party. So I went in my car. I got there. I had a ginger ale. I drank my toast to this guy I worked 20 years with. I said my goodbyes and I was out of there, in and out. My reason for being there was to pay respects to a coworker. When that was done, I was out of there. So I spiritually fit and have a legitimate reason for being there. So at the bottom of page 101, Bill tells us the questions to ask ourselves to see if we have a legitimate reason for being there. I know it's a little confusing. I started on the next page and I'm backing up. Bottom of page 101 are the questions to ask yourself to know, do I have a legitimate reason for being here? Number one, have I any good social, business, or personal reason for going? Be specific. Number two question, or am I expecting to steal a little vicarious pleasure from the atmosphere of such places? Vicarious pleasure is just secondhand, getting thrills through somebody else's experience, watching them do something and putting ourselves in that position. It's enjoying something through someone else's experience, I guess is the best way to put that. You're not actually doing it, but you are mentally sharing in that common experience. So am I looking for that, or do I have a legitimate reason for being there? And on the top of 102, Bill says if you answer these questions satisfactorily, which is yes, I'm spiritually fit and I have a legitimate reason for being there, you need have no apprehension, have no fear, have no anxiety. The rest of this paragraph, beginning with go or stay away, is highlighted. Go or stay away, whichever seems best. And here's where direction number 40 begins. Be sure you are on solid spiritual ground. Please underline that. Be sure you're on solid spiritual ground before you start. And you may want to circle and. It doesn't say or. And that your motive in going is thoroughly good. Please underline that your motive in going is thoroughly good, not a little bit, that your motive is thoroughly good. I never liked going to big family functions. I'm not a big fan of most of the people in my family. I think, in order for me to be friendly with you, we have to share more than a last name and a bloodline. And if I don't care for your personality, I don't care. And it doesn't matter if we're related. So I had a tendency to stay away from these big family functions. But in the last maybe 10 years, it came down to there were two members of the family that were in their 90s. And one was a concentration camp survivor, and one was my late dad's only surviving brother. And I wanted to get as much time with them as possible. So I went to these family functions, and my goal was to give them my ear, to pay attention to them, not to tell them what's going on in my life, but to let them talk. Because they were now the matriarch and patriarch of the family, and they would sit back and watch all of the family having a good time at this wedding or bar mitzvah or a seder or whatever it is. And I wanted to share in that, to give him and her my ear. So my legitimate reason for going to an affair that I don't care for, where there is a lot of drinking, was to give respect to these people. They've since passed on, and I haven't gone to an affair like that in a lot of years. I wish there was still a reason to go. But be that as it may, in line with what I just said, Bill says, don't think of what you'll get out of the occasion. Please underline, think of what you can bring to it. Now, that statement, incidentally, should also apply to why you go to meetings, right? Are you going to meetings just to fill up like a spiritual gas station? Or are you going there to give something? You're going to get or you're going to give? With the point at which we go to meetings with the intention of giving something, that's where recovery begins. When we're not going to meetings to dump, to share. No, I'm going there to find somebody who's struggling, to try and get them on the right track, to try and get them involved in this big book. That's where your recovery begins. So Bill says, think of what you can bring to it. But if you're shaky, you had better, and had better is a must. We circle that in or highlight it in green. And please underline work with another alcoholic instead. Remember, at the beginning, on page 89, we were told practical experience shows that nothing works better, nothing ensures continued sobriety than working with others when other activities fail. Notice it says, but if you're shaky, it doesn't say you had better double down on your meetings. Doesn't say that. It says if you're shaky, work with another alcoholic instead. And as I said, that's number 40 on your list of directions. Why sit with a long face in places where there is drinking, sighing about the old days? If it is a happy occasion, try to increase the pleasure to those there. So that's number one. If it's a happy occasion, remember on the previous page, Bill tells us any good social, business, or personal reasons. Let's drill down a little further. If it's a happy occasion, we go there with the intention of increasing the pleasure of others, increasing again, giving something, bringing something. And again, if it's an older family member, it's giving your time, giving your attention, because they may not be there at the next family function. If it's a business occasion, here's number two. First one, it's a happy occasion. Go there to increase the pleasure to others. If it's a business occasion, like that retirement thing that I just told you about, go and attend to your business enthusiastically. And I went enthusiastically. I posted a toast to him. Enthusiastically comes from the Greek word for being in sync with God. So I was spiritually fit. I was in sync with God. I wished him the best wishes going forward, and I left. I had a good business reason for being there. I fulfilled it and I left. If you're with a person who wants to eat in a bar, by all means go along. My brother, my son, loved to have a beer with dinner or a glass of wine. And they are they are the gentlemen drinkers because they'll drink that and leave half of it behind, which to me is alcohol abuse. But that's if they want to do that, fine. I'm going to go there and increase the pleasure of their going to where they want to go. I don't let the drinking bother me. Legitimate reason, spiritually fit. By all means, go along. We're on page 102, paragraph 1, right in the middle. And I've highlighted these next two sentences. Let your friends know they can and are not to change their habits on your, that they are not to change their habits on your account. At a proper time and place, explain to all your friends why alcohol disagrees with you. Uh, if they're really a friend, they know exactly what's going on. Even if you think they didn't, they know. If you do this thoroughly, and I've underlined that word thoroughly, we don't hold back. We're talking to friends, we're talking to loved ones. Why hedge? They know anyway. So if you explain it thoroughly, and again, it's not, I don't drink anymore because I have an allergy. Whenever I drink, I break out. I break out in police cars. I break out in handcuffs. I break out in store windows. That's, tell them the truth. Then you may want to joke around, but be thorough. Few people will ask you to drink. While you were drinking, you were withdrawing from life little by little. Now you're getting back into the social life of this world. Don't start to withdraw again just because your friends drink liquor. Here's number 41. This next paragraph is direction number 41. I'm going to suggest you highlight it all. Your job now, you may want to underline that. Now, our job now is to be at the place. And I'm going to suggest you highlight be at the place in blue because it means approach. We highlight approach references in blue. And if I am being in a certain place, I've approached that place. I've gone there with this purpose. So my job now is to approach where you can be maximum helpfulness to others, be of maximum helpfulness to others. You may want to underline that, be of maximum help to others. So never hesitate to go anywhere. And I think that's another approach reference. Go anywhere. That should be in blue because it means approach if you can be helpful. And these next two sentences, although we've already highlighted it, I'm going to suggest you over highlight it in pink because these are promises. You should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such an errand. Visit is an approach reference. On such an errand, that's an approach reference. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed. Underline that last sentence, that last phrase. With these motives, God will keep you unharmed. You know what that is? That's God armor. God protects us. If our motives are right and we're spiritually fit, we've got our God armor on. We're protected. We are not alone. Many of us keep liquor in our homes. We often need it to carry green recruits through a severe hangover. Some of us still serve it to our friends, provided they're not alcoholic. But some of us think we should not serve liquor to anyone. We never argue, and that never is a must. We never argue this question. We feel that each family, in the light of their own circumstances, ought to decide for themselves. Next paragraph, pretty much in its entirety, is direction number 42. It starts with, we are careful, and that first sentence is highlighted, incidentally. We are careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. Never is a must. We should never show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. My opinion about this paragraph is I suspect Bill is taking some shots at the Oxford group. Remember, we came from the Oxford group. The Oxford group really gave birth to Alcoholics Anonymous, but the Oxford group had bigger plans. They wanted to change the world, and we were just looking to help one alcoholic at a time. They basically threw Bill and Lois out because they said they were impure because they only wanted to work with alcoholics. So there's a number of things in this paragraph that I believe Bill is pointing out. Look, Oxford did this kind of stuff. We don't. And that first sentence is one of them. We don't show intolerance or hatred towards drinking as an institution. The Oxford group was a tolerance, a temperance movement. They wanted alcohol eliminated from the face of the earth. There's no reason for it to exist. That's not us. We're looking to help alcoholics get sober. Experience shows that such an attitude is not helpful to anyone. Every new alcoholic looks for the spirit among us and is immensely relieved when he finds we are not witch burners. And let's highlight this next sentence. And this is where direction number 42 ends. At the end of this sentence, a spirit of intolerance might repel alcoholics whose lives could have been saved had it not been for such stupidity. Please underline stupidity and the word intolerance, because it means the same thing. Intolerance is stupidity. So, and I think that makes sense. When I came in here, I didn't want to talk to people who hated alcohol and drugs. If you spoke disparagingly about alcohol and drugs, you're talking about somebody I love. I don't want to hear about that. I need to talk with people who love this, loved it, but we're here because it didn't love us. So I don't want to talk to people who have a hatred for alcohol or smoking or coffee, which is what the Oxford group was all about too, incidentally. So continuing, we would not even do the cause of temperate drinking any good, for not one drinker in 1,000 likes to be told anything about alcohol by one who hates it. Like I said, you're talking about a loved one. Don't be rude and crude. Someday, we hope that Alcoholics Anonymous will help the public to a better realization of the gravity of the alcoholic problem. I think we've done a hell of a job. Here is number 43. This is the 43rd, the last direction on this list from this chapter. To a better realization of the alcoholic problem. And here's number 43. Let's highlight, but we shall be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness or hostility. Drinkers will not stand for it. And I'm going to suggest a note here where it says, be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness or hostility. Next to that, I've written, including gossip. If we're standing outside a meeting and we're talking about other people and it's not loving and tolerant, and if it's not expressing those spiritual principles, it's gossip. It's bitter, it's hostility, it's expressing a superiority over others. It's not to be accepted. It's not a spiritual principle. Gossip is not one of our spiritual principles. Drinkers will not stand for that. And these next 3 lines, the squiggly writing, is all highlighted. And it says, after all, and let's underline, our problems were of our own making. Remember this self-imposed crisis self-imposed crisis means we imposed it. Please underline, bottles were only a symbol. Alcohol was a symbol of my disease, right? Sobriety is a symbol of my spiritual condition. Once again, alcohol is a symbol of my spiritual dis-ease, the same way sobriety is a symbol of my spiritual ease or my spiritual condition. Besides, we have stopped fighting anybody or anything. Remember that? Let's, for the heck of it, let's hold this page where it is, and next to it write, see page 84, paragraph 3. And 84, paragraph 3, begins with the sentence I want to draw your attention to, which says, "And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol." So all Bill is doing here on page 103 is reminding us what he told us back on page 84 when we were talking about step 10 and into 11. We have stopped fighting anybody or anything. Here's a must. We have to. Remember, we have to, or it kills us. Remember those death sentences that Bill gave us a while back? That resentment is deadly because resentment can cause an alcoholic to drink. And if an alcoholic drinks, it'll kill us. So resentments can kill us. We have to be free of these things. So what I want to do now is we're going to jump to page 136. We're going to talk about two employers. And we're going to come at this chapter three different ways. We're going to come at it as we read it now and emphasize some of the points on working with others, some of the directions for 12-step work. We're also going to go through it like we do any other chapter. And then the third way we're going to go through it is a little later. After we've done this chapter, we're going to do what I call as a flyover for chapters employers, wives, family afterwards. And because those are the chapters that include the instructions for the third part of step 12. Step 12 is a three-part step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps is the greatest promise we offer the newcomer. That's the first part of the 12th step. The second part, we're being charged. Nothing is free in life. We're being handed a bill in the second part, which is to carry this message, spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, to others. The instructions for that are in working with others and here. The instructions, incidentally, for the first part, having had a spiritual awakening, is in the doctor's opinion in the first 6 chapters. But there's a third part, to practice these principles in all of our affairs. That's the challenge, the greatest challenge of all. Where are the instructions for that? There isn't a chapter that's entitled that. Bill doesn't at any point in these chapters say, here are the principles by which we will be living. He buries them. And if we carefully comb through them, we'll find them. Like Bill says in the Spiritual Experience Appendix, careful reading is required. So that's the third way we're going to go through this as a collective part of these other chapters. But for now, we're going to look at it in the context of the book and in the context of working with others. So a couple of things about this chapter. For one, this is the only chapter in the first 164 pages that does not mention God. Not once. Doesn't mention a higher power. Doesn't mention a spiritual solution. This story, this chapter, was supposed to be written by Hank Parkhurst, Bill's partner in writing the big book. Bill Shaberg, who's a friend of the meeting and who wrote that magnificent book that we're going to talk about in a minute, Writing the Big Book. He describes Hank Parkhurst as the founder who drank because he did relapse. But he also says, no Hank, no book, because he was the motivator behind Bill, who was a lazy New Englander and liked to take his time and just dawdle around. And Hank was always, get the book, sit down, do the writing, let's get it done, let's get it done. Otherwise, the book would probably not have been written. But Hank had a lot of experience in business, and we'll talk about some of that in a moment. So he was perfect for this. Bill never was in charge of a large workforce. So Bill really couldn't be the one to write this chapter. It was perfect for Hank. And Hank, incidentally, his story was in the first edition. It's called The Unbeliever. It was removed because Hank relapsed, and you'll find it now in the other book, Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is a compilation of all of the stories that were ever in the book and for whatever reason were removed. Again, Experience, Strength, and Hope. His story is the unbeliever. But I'm going to read to you some things from writing the big book that Bill Shaberg addresses about Hank and this chapter. Bert, if you want, I'm on page 393 of this wonderful book, Writing the Big Book, but I'm going to be jumping around between 393 and 395. So don't try and follow. You just may want to make note of the page numbers. He says, this chapter was to be Hank's because of his passionate commitment to the theory that large corporations would be more receptive to their new solutions than anyone else. They spend thousands of dollars in training a man, then are obliged to toss him onto the scrap heap because he's an alcoholic. The key point here, and in the chapter that Hank would write, is that in addition to any altruistic considerations, it just made good business sense to invest in a man's recovery, in an employee's recovery, rather than firing this once valuable employee as an incorrigible drunk and an irredeemable liability. Irredeemable liability. No turning this guy around. Wouldn't it make better sense for the company to help him turn his life around and once again become a valuable asset to the corporation? So that's why Hank was perfect for this. However, Hank had an odd way of writing. He went to a creative writing course before the book was written, and his story, The Unbeliever, is written in a very artsy-fartsy kind of stream of consciousness style that's difficult to follow and would be completely inappropriate for this chapter. And even in his best times, Hank was not a good communicator of things in writing. And that's what Bill Shaberg is saying here. He said, Bill still had one glaring problem: Hank's atrocious writing style. Given the rather staid and conservative target audience for this chapter, Parkhurst would not be experimenting with any of the more flamboyant techniques he so recently learned in creative writing school, such as the stream of consciousness presentation he used when writing his own story. But then Hank's normal prose could be quite as torturous, and even this more extravagant example at this extreme example of creative writing. Bill was aware of this, and he resolved the problem by claiming the right to edit anything in the book. That was Bill's agreement. Anything in the book was up to his edit, and it included Hank's chapters. So he was going to edit Hank's chapter as he saw fit. And as he once told Lois, he thought the book, except for the story, should all be written in the same style. Whatever Hank might write, Bill was committed to making sure it blended seamlessly with all of the other chapters. Now, let's take the first chapter, the first paragraph here. Let me read it to you the way it appears in the book. Probably a good way to start, right? Among many employers, we're on page 136. Among many employers nowadays, we think of one member who has spent much of his life in the world of big business. That's referring to Hank Parkhurst. This is Bill's introduction of who is going to be writing this chapter. He was hired and fired. He has hired and fired hundreds of men. He knows the alcoholic as the employer sees him. His present views ought to prove exceptionally useful to businessmen everywhere. But let him tell you. Now, in the first edition, it's written differently. If you're lucky to have a reproduction of the first edition. We're talking about this one. And in that chapter, in that section, this is the way the chapter begins. One of our friends, whose gripping story you have read, Again, the story, The Unbeliever, was in the first edition, so you did read the story if you read the book. If he'd have kept that in the current two employers, it wouldn't have made sense because you didn't read that story. So one of our friends whose gripping story you have read has spent much of his life in the world of big business. He has hired and fired hundreds of men. He knows the alcoholic as the employer sees him. His present views ought to prove exceptionally useful to businessmen everywhere. But let him tell you. Now, in the original first edition, there was a line skipped. There was a space between the sentence that ends with exceptionally useful to businessman everywhere. Then there was a double space, a blank, but let him tell you. And the significance of that double space is in literature, when you put a double space in the middle of a chapter or a paragraph, it indicates a shift to another voice, a shift to another speaker, a shift to another writer. So Bill is speaking in this first paragraph where he says, among employers nowadays, we can think of one, he is hired and fired, blah, blah, blah. But let him tell you. So he's technically introducing Hank. This chapter, Bill tried as best he could to remain true to what Hank had written. There are some points here where you'll see it's quite obvious it wasn't Bill, but be that as it may, it's now Bill writing, but it's Hank's ideas and points being made. Let's continue. I was at the time assistant manager of a corporation department employing 6,600 men. So he's responsible for a lot of people, right? One day my secretary came in saying that Mr. B insisted on speaking with me. I told her I was not interested. I had warned him several times that he had but one more chance. Not long afterwards, he had called me from Hartford on 2 successive days, so drunk he could hardly speak. I told him he was through, finally and forever. So he's now getting a call from Mr. B, and I'll tell you who Mr. B is in a moment. And this is what happened. My secretary returned to say it was not Mr. B on the phone. It was Mr. B's brother. And he wished to give me a message. I still expected a plea for clemency, but these are the words that came through the receiver. I just wanted to tell you, Paul jumped from a hotel window in Hartford last Saturday. He left us a note saying you were the best boss he ever had, and you are not to blame in any way. Now, recently, I guess maybe because we're coming up to this chapter, a number of people here have been asking me about the identity of Mr. B. Who is Mr. B? Well, for you history buffs, I have that answer. Our friend Gary Neihart gave me some incredible information. But this is a story. This guy, Mr. B, was a real person. His name was David. David B. He lived in Montclair, New Jersey. He was an insurance executive who came into contact with the early fellowship through the Oxford group. He connected with us through the Oxford group. His story was included in the narratives in the Big Book first edition. His story was called A Businessman's Recovery. If you have, again, like I said before, a copy of the first edition, it's in here. If you have the compilation of stories that were removed, Experience, Strength, and Hope, it's in there. His story is called A Businessman's Recovery. That's who Mr. B is. The text notes that David B ultimately, quote, died by his own hand. an early reference to suicide within the fellowship's literature. Bill W. and many early members pointed out David B.'s tragic death as an example of the seriousness of alcoholism, even for those who had early contact with recovery. His life and death serve as a cautionary tale within AA history. So we've now identified somebody who, for me, for 30 some odd years had remained nameless. I did not know this information. We now do. The guy we're talking about here, his name is David B. His story is in the first edition. It's called A Businessman's Recovery. That's who we're talking about. His brother called to give him this news. So, getting back to page 136, another time, as I opened a letter which lay on my desk, a newspaper clipping fell out. It was the obituary of one of the best salesmen I ever had. After 2 weeks of drinking, he placed his toe on the trigger of a loaded shotgun, the barrel in his mouth. I had discharged him for drinking 6 weeks before. Still another experience. A woman's voice came faintly over long distance from Virginia. She wanted to know if her husband's company insurance was still in force. 4 days before he had hung himself in his woodshed. I'd been obliged to discharge him for drinking, though he was brilliant, alert, and one of the best organizers I'd ever known. Now, without even a pause to mourn or make a statement about these 3 suicides, without even mentioning the loss of human life that we just ran into and the profound effects that it had on these men's families, which would indicate a little bit of compassion. What Hank does is he goes right into his pitch to the employer. It just notifies us that the nature of this chapter is not going to be emotional, that this is strictly business. He's not bringing emotion to play at all. Again, he just went through 3 amazing stories. 3 people committed suicide because of being lost their job or being warned about losing their job, and without missing a beat, without expressing a word of mourning or regret or something to the family, he goes right into what he was going to do anyway. So here were 3 exceptional men, and there's the only note of remorse, in a sense of they were exceptional men, lost to this world because, let's highlight this, I did not understand alcoholism as I do now. He clearly blames himself for a part played in these men's death. Again, this is Hank. This is Hank before recovery. This is Hank probably when he was still drinking, but he didn't know any better. He blamed himself for what these men did. And but for the intervention of an understanding person, I might have followed in their footsteps. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's talking about 2 understanding persons, Dr. Soapworth and Bill Wilson, because Hank Parkhurst had been a patient at Towns Hospital 9 times prior to his 10th visit, which is when he met Bill Wilson. So the person who told him what was wrong with him, who diagnosed his problem, who let him know about the allergy and the obsession, was Dr. Silkworth. And the person who let him know about the solution was Bill Wilson when he called on Hank at Towns Hospital on Hank's 10th stay there. Give you an idea of how wealthy Hank must have been. This place was it could be a couple of $1,000 a day to be treated at Towns Hospital. And he was there 10 times. Okay. I might have followed in their footsteps. My downfall cost the business community unknown thousands of dollars, for it takes real money to train a man for an executive position. This kind of waste goes on unabated. Unabated just means it's not lessened, it's not decreased. The number of cases are not going down. The numbers of cases are static, undiminished. We think the business fabric is shot through with a situation which might be helped by better understanding all around. Remember in the forward to the first edition, Bill made a statement along the lines that we think this account can have its uses for all. So he's just pointing out here the same thing, that this could be helpful to all around, all businessmen. Nearly every modern employer feels a moral responsibility for the well-being of his help, and he tries to meet these responsibilities. That he has not always done so for the alcoholic is easily understood. Please highlight this sentence. To him, the alcoholic has often seemed a fool of the first magnitude. He doesn't realize he's a sick person. Doesn't realize he's a sick person. That also applies to, again, directions for working with others. We're working with people who, in many cases, certainly in all the cases that Bill was dealing with, did not know that it was an illness. They thought it was a question of willpower or a question of morality. Why don't you just say no? That's what they thought it was. So that lack of intelligence is evident here, that he didn't know, they didn't know that they were sick people themselves. Because of the employee's special ability or of his own strong personal attachment to him, the employer has sometimes kept such a man at work long beyond a reasonable period. I'm going to suggest you highlight those 4 lines. Let me repeat it again because it's a form of enabling. Because of the employee's special ability or his own personal attachment to him. He's got a good salesman. I've had guys working for me like that. That they're good salesmen, they're good earners, but they're killing themselves. Once they leave work, what happens? Because of his own strong personal attachment to him, the employer has sometimes kept such a man at work long beyond a reasonable period. He likes the guy. I've had those guys. I like them. But you see where they're heading, and it's not good for them, and it certainly isn't good for the business. Yeah, he's a good earner. When he's sober, he sells a lot of cars for me. I want him to stay on, but he's killing himself. Some employers have tried every known remedy. In only a few instances, there's been a lack of patience and tolerance. So he believes that because the employer thinks the guy's an earner or I like him, we're keeping him on. So keeping him on hasn't been because of a lack of patience and a lack of tolerance. And we as alcoholics who have imposed on the best of employers can scarcely blame them if they've been short with us. Here, for instance, is a typical example. You may want to underline that word typical or highlight it. How ironic is it that he uses that word typical, because we like to think of ourselves as being so unique and so different that to say we actually follow a pattern that's so easily recognizable, it's unfathomable to us. It's unacceptable to us that I have typical behaviors. I'm different. I don't behave like anybody else. Our behavior patterns are usually so abnormal and so out of the ordinary that one could not help but recognize the severity of our problems. Accept us. Accept us. So, just a comment on the use of the word typical. He's going to be using the word again in another moment. Here, for instance, is a typical example. Those of us who think we're not typical. A An officer of one of the largest banking institutions in America knows I no longer drink. The large banking institution, as I understand it, was the Morris Plan banks. And what that was it was a network of banks created during the Depression to assist the middle class in obtaining home loans. It was developed by Attorney Arthur Morris, which is why they call it the Morris Plans. It's a large banking institution that was specializing in getting loan assistance to middle class people who ordinarily could not get these loans. One day, he told me about an executive of the same bank who, from his description, was undoubtedly alcoholic. Please highlight that. And just for clarity purposes, there have been some workshops in the past that are recorded that are still out there where I've identified that guy incorrectly as Clarence Snyder. It is not Clarence Snyder. I was given that information incorrectly. I did some reading on it, and most of the things I read were just as incorrect. But the people I spoke to who knew Clarence said that that's impossible. Couldn't be for a number of reasons, and I don't want to spend 20 minutes on Clarence Snyder right now, but it's not Clarence Snyder. So if you have it written in your book from previous workshops that this is Clarence, cross it out, please. It's not. Okay. This seemed to me like an opportunity to be helpful. So I spent 2 hours talking about alcoholism. And above that, I've written allergy and obsession. What else is he going to talk about? What type of liquor you drink? How many ice cubes you may or may not put in it? He's talking about alcoholism, not alcohol, alcoholism, which is allergy and obsession. The malady, and described the symptoms and the results as well as I could. His comment was very interesting, but I'm sure this man is done drinking. He has just returned from a 3-month leave of absence. He has taken a cure. I mean, he's been in a sanitarium, he's been in a rest home. He looks fine. And to clinch the matter, the board of directors told him this was his last chance. What does that sound like?
Frothy emotional.
Yep. Frothy emotional appeal. That's what that is. A frothy emotional appeal. The board of directors told him, this is it. This is your last chance. We just paid the bill for this hospitalization. We're not paying it again. You drink again, you're gone. So that's a lofty emotional appeal. The only answer I could make was that if the man followed, and here it is again, the usual pattern, in other words, the typical pattern. We alcoholics think we're all different, that we don't follow a path that we all seem to follow. He would go on a bigger bust than ever. I felt this was inevitable and wondered if the bank was doing the man an injustice. Why not bring him into contact with some of our alcoholic crowd? He might have a chance. I pointed out that I had had nothing to drink whatever for 3 years, and this is the face of difficulties, and this in the face of difficulties that would have made 9 out of 10 men drink their heads off. Why not at least afford him an opportunity to hear my story? Oh no, oh no, said my friend. Quote, this chap is either through with liquor or he's minus a job. Right? He put his hand on the Bible, swore on his children's lives. This is it. Done. Remember Bill's solemn pledges to Lois? This time I mean it 3 months later. No, this time I really, really mean it a few months later. No, I really, really, really mean it this time. It's the alcoholics' national anthem, right? This time I mean it. And we do. We do. Every time we say that, we do. I did at least. Whenever
If he has your will.
there it is. Let's highlight that last sentence. If he has your willpower and guts, he'll make the grade. In other words, they still misunderstand that potential. That employer is basically saying that if this guy has the same willpower you have, now bear in mind, Hank has spent 2 hours talking to him about the allergy and the obsession. 2 hours he's spent giving him an education into what alcoholism is and isn't. And this knucklehead could still 2 hours later think it's a matter of willpower. And if he has your willpower, he's done with drinking. 2 hours. Can you imagine how the guy must have felt? I spent 2 hours with this moron and he still thinks it's willpower. Frustrating. I wanted to throw up my hands in discouragement, for I saw I'd failed to help my banker friend understand. How could this guy, his friend, who's an accomplished, intelligent rather, businessman, how can he be so blind as to listen to these arguments for 2 hours and Hank's personal testimony about the subtlety of this disease and still think it's a matter of willpower? It's extraordinary how deep the misunderstanding lies. It's an intelligent guy. He's head of a company, head of a bank. He listened for 2 hours to a presentation on alcoholism. Missed the point entirely. So he simply could not believe that his brother executive suffered from a serious illness. Please highlight those two words, a serious illness. He still, 2 hours after this presentation, still judges him to be weak. Just a matter of willpower. If he had your willpower, he'd be fine. There was nothing to do but wait, right? Wait for that other shoe to drop. Presently, the man did slip and was fired. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Duh. Following his discharge, let's highlight this in blue. We contacted him. They made the approach. They made the approach to him after he got fired. I guess they didn't have the information to contact him ahead of time, or maybe because of respect for the employer, they chose not to do that. But once he was fired, there was no reason not to go directly to the guy. Presently, the man did slip and was fired. Following his discharge, we contacted him. Without much ado, he accepted the principles and procedure that had helped us. The principles, which is how we're to live, are the guides to our behaviors, of our ideas, our outlooks, and our attitudes. That we have to change, that we have to adopt if we are to recover. So once again, he's talking about, we told him about the principles and the procedure. The principles are the attitudes by which we are going to adopt once we recover in order to stay sober. The procedures are how we're to get there. So once again, the principles are the attitudes by which we're going to live in order to stay sober. The change in our attitudes, emotions, that Dr. Silk, that Dr. Yes, Young told Roland Hazard that the ideas, emotions, and attitudes that were the guiding force of your life have to be changed, and a whole new set of principles replace them. That's what we're talking about when we say the principles. The procedure is a reference to how we're to get to that point. There's a simple program of action called the steps. That's what's outlined in this book, the attitude. And it's carried out through the action of the steps. We change our attitude as a result of the procedures, and the procedures are the steps. So, accepting the principles and procedure that helped us, he is undoubtedly on the road to recovery. To me, this incident, and let's highlight this, please, the rest of the paragraph highlight, illustrates the lack of understanding as to what really ails the alcoholic and lack of knowledge as to what part employers might profitably, let's underline that, profitably take in salvaging their sick employees. The point being, when he says the lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge, is that these are not weak people. These are not immoral people. These are mentally and physically sick people. And if you help them get better, it's better for your profit, for your bottom line as well. If you desire to help, it might be well to disregard your own drinking or lack of it. So he's telling the employers, don't compare it to yourself. You may drink a lot, but you're able to put it down. Forget your experience. If you're not an alcoholic, you're not going to be able to relate to the alcoholic. So he's telling the potential employers, don't think of this in terms of your experience with alcohol. That's irrelevant, because if you're not an alcoholic, you don't have the experience that this guy did. So let's highlight the next sentence, if you wouldn't mind. Whether you are a hard drinker, a moderate drinker, or a teetotaler. A teetotaler is just someone who doesn't drink. You may have some pretty strong opinions, perhaps prejudices. How do we find God? What's the first thing we do? Lay aside prejudice. So once again, we have to lay aside prejudice in this matter as well. Put aside the things we think we know. Set aside prayer. Those who drink moderately may be more annoyed with an alcoholic man than a total abstainer would be. Drinking occasionally and understanding your own reactions, it's possible for you to become quite sure of many things which, so far as the alcoholic is concerned, are not always so. Again, if you're not the alcoholic, you're not going to be able to view alcohol the way alcoholics do. If you're a moderate drinker or you're a total abstainer or teetotaler, your relationship with alcohol is totally, totally different than this guy's. And that's what he's pointing out. Please highlight the next two sentences because it just explains that. As a moderate drinker, you can take your liquor or leave it alone. Doesn't that sound familiar? Right? You can take it or leave it alone. Why is that? No allergy, no obsession. But what about the real alcoholic? Sound familiar? So as a moderate drinker, you can take your liquor or leave it alone. Whenever you want to, you control your drinking. 3 examples in one sentence. Your. Talking about willpower, assuming it's your choice. You have a choice. You could take it or leave it alone. It shows a lack of understanding, full of misinformation. Whether you want to, you can control your drinking. Of an evening, you can go on a mild bender, get up in the morning, shake your head, and go to business. Let's highlight this last 3 lines. To you, liquor is no real problem. You cannot see why it would be to anyone else, save the spineless and stupid. Let me go through that again. To you, not the real alcoholics, if you're not the real alcoholic, liquor is not a problem. You cannot see why it should be, not the it should be is staying sober. Because again, we don't have an alcohol problem. We have a sobriety problem. And you'll never get a moderate or a hard drinker to grasp that one. That one is way beyond them. You'll understand it if you're an alcoholic. You won't if you're not. You can't see why it should be to anyone else. The it should be is staying sober, save the spineless and the stupid. Therefore, step work is not necessary because it's just a matter of choice. You set your mind to it. That's all there is to it. You may want to highlight the next paragraph. It's only 4 lines long. When dealing with an alcoholic, there may be a natural annoyance that a man could be so weak, stupid, and irresponsible. Let's underline weak, stupid, and irresponsible. Even when you understand the malady better, you may feel this feeling rise. Is that how you view relapses? I mean, think about that. Have you ever thought that people who relapse are weak, right? He doesn't want it enough, or stupid, or irresponsible. Doesn't he see that he's losing his family? He's losing this, he's losing that. Have we ever made those judgments about people who relapse? Yeah, we have. So I think this paragraph should be part of the directions for working with alcoholics, is to remember that a relapse isn't because you're weak or stupid or irresponsible, that even if you understand it and that feeling arises in you, remember that these are sick. Remember that these are sick men or women. A look at the alcoholic in your organization is many times illuminating. Please highlight this first one. Number 1, is he not usually brilliant, fast-thinking, imaginative, and likable? I like that one. I like to think I was that guy. Brilliant, fast-thinking, imaginative, and likable. And again, is he not usually? Usually is another reference to typical. We think we're special. We think there's nobody like us. Yet we follow such typical patterns all the time. Remember, incidentally, when reading that sentence, that this was written by an alcoholic who obviously thinks quite highly of himself and his abilities. It's Hank and it's Bill. Both of them think quite highly of himself. Ego was a big issue. Is he not typically brilliant, fast-thinking, imaginative, and likable when sober? Number 2, he did not work when sober. Does he not work hard and have a knack of getting things done? Number 3, and again, we're numbering here. He says at the beginning of this paragraph that looking at the alcoholic is illuminating. You're looking at him, and this is what you're seeing. You're seeing that he's typical, he's brilliant, he's fast thinking, imaginative, likable, that he works hard and has a knack of getting things done. Number 3, if he had these qualities and did not drink, would he be worth retaining? Number 4, should he have the same consideration as other ailing employees? Above ailing, let's use the word sick. Shouldn't he be considered the same as some guy with a heart condition or some guy with cancer who has a heart attack or has a reemergence of his cancer? Number 5, is he worth salvaging? If your decision is yes, whether the reason be humanitarian or business or both, then the following suggestions may be helpful. And on that note, that cliffhanger, we're going to stop. We're going to have to answer that question next week. So let me turn off the recording.